Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Catholic Family News. This is Murray Rundus, the production manager and managing editor here at CFN, and I'm joining you from a bit of a different place. I'm joining you from Rome. We're giving you some exclusive coverage on the Conclave, and so we're in a different place today. But there's been a lot of stuff that's gone on regarding the Conclave, even while I've been here. And so we're giving you an update specifically about two things. Firstly, I want to cover this controversy about Cardinal Parolin, and this conclave is just getting more and more controversial by the day, and it certainly heated up yesterday morning, May the 1st, where it was rumored about Cardinal Parolin having a major health crisis, or at least a moderate health crisis that would stir up the conclave, as he is, as it currently stands, in many ways the favorite, but especially the favorite for the progressive or the liberal party. I'm also going to talk about some of the speeches that have been given at the homilies for the death of Pope Francis. There are these 9 days of mourning, and I think there's a lot of misunderstanding that many people have about how do those homilies get determined, who chooses who speaks when, and also really just some of the things that were said, because the Vatican News articles about those homilies actually don't give you the full text. And so we're going to be looking at the text itself of some of these things, some of the more controversial things, and we can really get an insight into what the cardinals are thinking about, how these cardinals within their various factions are speaking at those homilies, and we can learn a lot from that. But to begin, I want to talk about Cardinal Parolin. So we reported, going along with many other reports, that Cardinal Parolin, who is in his 70s, there was a Vatican alert, was the word that was put out there, that he had a health crisis, that he had an increase in blood pressure, and this required medical assistance, and that he received medical assistance from a team for about an hour, and that after that he was okay. Now, this, of course, goes along with a bit of a narrative that many people have, and I think it's almost a common sense narrative, that Cardinal Parolin has been lobbying to be Pope. He is an important role in the Curia. He's the Secretary of State. He obviously has an interest in becoming Pope. Much of the liberal members of the College of Cardinals have been rallying around him, and he does seem to have been making plays. We also learned that there was a bit of a disappointment from some of the cardinals who spoke anonymously when he gave his homily for those 9 days of mourning speeches that we'll get to in a minute, that many people were disappointed that he came across as being quite stilted, that he didn't give the energy, the charisma that many of the liberal cardinals wanted. And so we reported on this, and there's been some controversy. So firstly, where did that report originate from? Well, where I first saw it was from Diane Montagna, who was reporting this from an Italian source. And the Italian source comes from here. I have it on the screen here. It's from Il Tempo. It's an Italian journalistic website. It was an article about Cardinal Bishou, who is, of course, not going to be voting in the conclave anymore because there was a corruption scandal surrounding him. There was a letter brought out that was supposedly by Pope Francis and saying he shouldn't be voting in the conclave, and he withdrew. Well, at the bottom of this article is really where this really matters. It says, in any case, it will be up to the new Pope to eventually confirm him, Bishou, in the role where Francis wanted him, despite the fact that he lacks suitable legal skills and despite the numerous other positions he has held in the Curia. Meanwhile, yesterday afternoon, the Vatican sounded the alarm, quote-unquote alarm, for the health of the Secretary of State and among the papabili to the throne of Pietro Parolin. The 70-year-old cardinal was reached by a medical team who assisted him for an hour. Parolin would still be out of danger. It would only have been a surge in pressure. So it's a very brief thing that is stated there. Now, there is a number of things that corroborated this. We also had one of the people at the Pillar, which is a journalistic website here, English speaking, J.D. Flynn. He mentioned that he had corroborated this and that Parolin visited a doctor and that he had confirmed this with his sources. And so I think this was not unwarranted that people brought this up. I think it's almost again, going back to that sort of common sense reading of the situation, this man is 70 years old. It's natural that he would be visiting a doctor. I don't think that's unexpected. But of course, any little controversy is going to cause shockwaves throughout the College of Cardinals. And so these reports do matter. Well, the Vatican has come out, and they came out with a statement following the Eighth General Congregation, which is where these cardinals meet to talk about the upcoming conclave. After that, there was a press briefing where Bruni, who's the sort of the Vatican spokesperson, he said, responding to the Vatican news article says, responding to a reporter's question about an alleged health incident involving Cardinal Parolin, Bruni emphatically denied that it had occurred. Quote, no, this did not happen. It is not true, end quote. Bruni also denied that doctors or nurses had intervened. He says, quote, no, absolutely not. And so that's an emphatic denial of the health incident with Cardinal Parolin. And so many people have said, you see, it was all fake news. This has been completely debunked. Well, I still think there's some reason for skepticism. The Vatican has not been completely forthcoming when it comes to health incidents, especially on the part of we look back and with even this health incident with Pope Francis. And I think we can ask the question of, especially since we didn't get any sort of facts on the situation. I mean, from what it sounds like, his stance is that there's simply no factual bearing on the situation. But I'm still skeptical. Again, he's a 70-year-old man who is under an incredible amount of stress, and I think it's natural that he would visit a doctor, especially if we have many sources putting him at the scene of visiting a doctor. I don't think that's crazy. Would that warrant the Cardinals stepping back and saying, let's not vote for him because he visited a doctor? I mean, you could make the argument that might show that he's not fit for the job if he's under such a bunch of stress and he has a health incident. But really, I think the reason why that might scare off a lot of Cardinals is that Cardinal Parolin is sort of a spectacle at this point. The whole media is around him because of his liberal positions. When he came out about the traditional Latin Mass, whether being very against it or trying to make various politicking moves to seem like he was more for the traditional Mass, or at least allowing it in certain circumstances, the press blows up. And I think if I was a cardinal, I would say that's exactly what we don't need at the present state of the church. And so I would suspect that this is the Vatican sort of covering up the situation. I think Cardinal Parolin probably did visit a doctor, and the Cardinals are probably going to draw conclusions from that. So the liberal Cardinals, the progressive Cardinals, are probably going to have to look for someone else. And a quick word on that. I saw there was a bit of concern on this because I even said we should be praying for Cardinal Parolin. We should be praying for the College of Cardinals as it stands. And I think some people took offense at that. They said that if you're praying for these liberal cardinals, you're almost saying what they're saying is okay. I think it's a duty of charity for us to be praying for even our enemies. And I consider many of these liberal prelates to be completely our enemies. They're enemies of the church in many ways, especially of the church's traditional doctrine. But in this regard, I think it's something we would want done to us, people praying for our good health, praying for our circumstances in this very important role. And I do think that these men are princes of the church. And I know there's some other traditional Catholics who think that there's been a sedevacante period for a much longer period than just after Pope Francis had died. But it is my position that these bishops, these cardinals, are valid electors, that these are valid princes of the church. And I think what we should do, I think we owe a filial piety to pray for them, to really root out the errors in the church. And if they have that implanted in their heart, I don't think there's anything wrong with asking for us to pray for them to root out errors in their heart as well. All of this is to say that these cardinals have a lot going on at the moment. Obviously, they're picking a new member of the church and, a leader for the church. And we as members of the mystical body of Christ have a duty to be praying for this process because we are members of the mystical body. And if this body is going to be working properly, we have to dispose ourselves with really what the nature of this body is, which is a body, or at least a fundamental nature of it is one built on prayer. And I think we all have to be praying for the cardinal electors, even if we know that many of them don't hold to all of the traditional Catholic doctrines. So even with Cardinal Parolin, I think he deserves our prayers. Moving on, I want to talk a little bit about these Novem Dialis funeral masses for Pope Francis. And so these are going to be masses that the primary event of it. Of course, we have the mass itself, but the primary event that people are going to be looking at least from the press's perspective, is the cardinal's homily, because each day for each of these masses for mourning for Pope Francis is given by a different cardinal. Now, some people I think have gotten a little bit confused because it's not the dean who says all of those homilies, and it's not the Camerlengo who says it as well. So these are organizers really for the College of Cardinals during this time. It was decided at the second general conference for these cardinals. The general congregation, excuse me, the second general congregation, they decided this as a group. Now, there's been a lot of talk. There was, of course, what I mentioned earlier about Pietro Parolin, Cardinal Parolin's homily that he gave. And that shows us the fact that cardinals are talking about this. It shows us that the cardinals are interested in what these cardinals say, what these cardinals do. There's been a lot of talk, however, about one of the most recent ones on May 1st, which was Cardinal Fernandez's. Cardinal Victor Emmanuel Fernandez, who was, of course, a big figure in the Francis pontificate. So some people pointed to his speech saying, well, is this the liberals, knowing that Parolin is a less likely option now, and knowing that Zuppi has had problems of his own, are they pushing Fernandez now, trying to give him a big, strong homily so that they can rally around him? I think there's some things that can lead us to suspect both sides. So this is an article from NCR, National Catholic Register, and this lists the different ones. So again, this is decided at the second general congregation. The first one, really people have really mentioned this first one. The other various ones kind of got lost in the weeds. First one was Cardinal Ray. That, of course, is where, if you followed our previous coverage on this, that's where it almost seemed like a canonization of Francis, asking for Francis to pray for the faithful on earth. The second one was Cardinal Parolin. That was that one speech that seemed a bit stilted. At least some cardinals thought that, and much of the press thought that as well. Number 3 was Cardinal Reina. And that was on April 28th. April 24th was Cardinal Gambetti. And as you can see, there's different transcripts you can see for each of these different speeches. It's mainly focusing on different aspects of Francis's pontificate. Day 5, April 30th, was Cardinal Sandri, which was a concelebration reserved for cardinals only. The faithful is allowed in some of these, or at least others are allowed to come to the Mass. Day 6 is Cardinal Victor Emmanuel Fernandez, former prefect of the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith. Now, the May 1st one wasn't always Cardinal Fernandez. It used to be Cardinal Farrell, which would go along with Cardinal Farrell's role of being that Camerlengo, organizing this time for the conclave, but it was switched shortly after to give Cardinal Fernandez that role as a homilist for that day. Some people suspect is that a liberal move to try to get him out in the spotlight. It could be. I could also see it being just a logistical issue. Can't read too much into it. And the one we had today was for the Eastern churches, which we'll talk a little bit about today as well, with Cardinal Giugiarotti, who was the former prefect of the dicastery for the Eastern churches. Those are those Eastern Catholic churches. The Catholic Church doesn't just celebrate the Roman Rite. It has many different churches that has the Eastern rites as well, the Syro-Malabar, the Byzantine Rite, with the various Ruthenian, Ukrainian churches, etc. So when we look at Cardinal Fernandez's speech, we see something that is a real trend in what we're looking for with how different popes shape themselves. Cardinal Fernandez's whole speech was really about the worker priest and how Francis was the embodiment of the worker priest movement, going out there embodying work. I think there was some really good parts of his homily. I think he did a good job talking about the necessity for hard work and really showing the the terrible nature that greed can have in a massive capitalist society where, for example, a father trying to feed his many kids is treated as less than somebody who has gotten lucky in the stock market. I think some people might look at that, and I've already seen some people criticize his homily as being rooted in Marxism. I don't think it has to be. I think you can even take that in a Father Fahey sense. We have a whole bunch of lectures over on our premium channel, catholicfamilynews.locals.com, about Catholic social doctrine and how we do want a wide distribution of private property, not in the communist sense where the state owns everything, but a wide distribution of private property is something that the Catholic Church strives for in civil society. And I think that's what Cardinal Fernandez was really looking at. People are going to mention one of the things that was mentioned in the press about his speech was something he said about how some in their speeches will try to downgrade the poor or try to make fun of the poor. His words exactly here is what Vatican News quotes is these words struck me when somebody said, "Go and work, lazy bones," to somebody who had worked 12 and 15 hours a day. He says, quote, "These words struck me as horribly cruel and vain," said Cardinal Fernandez, quote, "but they are also present in other more elegant speeches," end quote. I think some people have extrapolated that as being an attack on some of the other cardinals. But again, if you're a Roman Catholic, I think you should want to help the poor. I don't think we can really see anything from that. There was one part of his speech that was very strange, and I think shows this desire to sort of canonize Francis and make him something that he wasn't, where Cardinal Fernandez was saying that Francis never took the time to watch TV or movies or things like that. And I think that's really not true. Pope Francis was making constant references to his favorite things in pop culture, whether that be music or sports teams or things like this. So I really just thought that was out of place. It shows that desire to canonize Francis, make him something that he wasn't. Overall, I think Cardinal Fernandez had a good speech in isolation. But I mentioned that thing about the worker priest. I think this emphasis on having the Catholic Church being very for the economic justice, economic wide distribution of private property, that's something that's very strong and very important in Catholic societies. And it's something where when you are dealing with societies where Catholicism is assumed, that worker priest movement often had a lot of influence. If you want a good read on that, Bishop Tissier de Mallaré, in his biography of Archbishop Lefebvre, even touches on some of that in France, even how there was that worker priest movement. But I noticed that this happens in societies where Catholicism is assumed, in societies where it's not so much, where Catholicism is struggling against liberalism, where you have a society full of relativism and secularism. It's hard to see something like the worker priest movement or even the Catholic Church's true understanding of wanting that wide distribution of private property. It's difficult to see that with a clear sight because you're not starting with really strong foundational principles. And so I really don't think, I think what we see in some regards is different approaches to the papacy, like with what Pope Francis had. He's coming in there almost assuming Catholicism. And I think that's kind of a mistake in many ways. I think we need a Pope who's going to come in there and be very strong on the foundational principles, looking for strong doctrine so that we can build on top of that and talk about the social movements that needs to be done in order to have justice in our society, to have strong economies that allow people to be have strong families and have strong lives. But until we really get the foundations right and we fight against liberalism, fight against secularism and relativism, I don't think that's possible. And I think that different approach is going to be noticed by some other cardinals, as even if they might not disagree, which is what the media will try to make this out to be, as if there's some kind of like laissez-faire, Milton Friedman, capitalist cardinals versus socialist cardinals. I don't think it's that, but I think there's a difference in priorities. Are we prioritizing unity and doctrine, as Cardinal Mueller said, or are we prioritizing economic justice and not really emphasizing doctrine so as to not scare away some people who are already disappointed in the Catholic Church? I think that's more of the Cardinal Fernandez side. And I think we see how even with Cardinal Fernandez's doings, doctrinal clarity is lacking today. And I think that's something that many of the cardinals are going to be thinking about as well. It's something I think about. I don't want to see more of that doctrinal confusion that we saw from Fernandez during that Pope Francis pontificate. And so I think many of those cardinals will share that belief. I don't think they want to see more of the same. If there's anything we've learned from the general congregations, it's been that these cardinals have serious concerns. Now, the last two things, the most recent one that happened today was about the Eastern churches. I think in some respects, this homily was very beautiful. There was an emphasis on the Eastern Fathers. I do have a problem with, and we saw this even at the funeral, almost this equivocation of refusing to make distinctions and really finding identities when it comes to why are the Eastern Orthodox wrong, and are they really outside of the Catholic Church? Because there was praise from this recent speech from Cardinal Giugiarotti, who about Eastern Catholics entering into communion with Rome. But a concern I have that he mentioned during this was saying that the Eastern Orthodox really share in the inheritance of the first millennium. So we have to, I think, make a stand. Did they go into schism after the first millennium, or did they not? The actions of the Catholic Church in recent years, such as what we saw with Pope Francis's funeral, putting Patriarch Bartholomew in the pride and place seat, saying he is the first among equals, despite him being outside of the church. I don't know if that's what we need to be signaling. I did see a lot of things in this recent homily that was a step in the right direction, really prioritizing that we want Eastern Catholics to be the ones that are the ones we're looking out for. But the Eastern Orthodox are outside of the church. And I think we need to be more clear on that. Pope Francis, we mentioned this on the show. It was said there was going to be a big surprise with the Eastern Orthodox, and we thought maybe he was going to change the Easter calendar. It could have been maybe giving some papal prerogatives to the Patriarch of Constantinople. We didn't know. What I think even some of the Eastern Catholic bishops would want those back to that doctrinal clarity. Many of those Eastern periphery cardinals that were appointed by Pope Francis, they were the same ones who were skeptical about fiducia supplicans. If you looked at how the Ruthenians responded, it was very strongly saying, we will not do these same-sex blessings that now the German bishops are citing fiducia supplicans and going all out with major blessings of same-sex unions. So I think that's going to be a problem. I wish that doctrinal clarity was combined with that prioritization of the beauty of the Eastern Church. And if we don't have that, I think we're going to end up with more and more splintering of the Catholic Church, and we just cannot have that today. But we've seen so much doctrinal confusion, especially after the Second Vatican Council, that's going to take a really strong pope in order to do that. Final note, it's going to be on the liturgy. At these various Novum Dialis rituals, these various masses for Pope Francis and Mourning, I noticed something interesting. Each one of these masses has the Eucharistic prayer. The Eucharistic prayer, that's the new version of a canon. It says it in Latin, and it also uses the fourth Eucharistic prayer, which, I mean, goodness, I think most of the new Eucharistic prayers are very deficient. I don't think they really match up to the old Roman canon. Even Eucharistic Prayer 1 in the new Mass struggles to compare with the true Roman canon when it comes to the gestures and the complete purity of the gestures, the actions, and the words. But the thing I find so interesting, many people have said this is a return to tradition. they brought out the old copes, they brought out the old vestments, and now they're saying the Eucharistic prayer in Latin for these funeral events, that they want a more conservative liturgy. I wouldn't go that far, but I do think it shows an inconsistency. Because I think even when the Novus Ordo is celebrated with the canon or the Eucharistic prayer in Latin, there are still some deficiencies. But what is the justification for the new Mass oftentimes? Is people saying, I want to understand it because the priest is going to be saying it out loud and in my own language. And typically it's lay participation. Well, if the standard that they're bringing up does not do that, it's something that's in Latin, it's the lay faithful aren't the ones understanding it, and they said the first half of the Mass in Italian, showing that is something they want to do to a degree. But if the canon is in Italian, excuse me, if the canon is in Latin, why do they feel the need to change the Roman canon? What is the justification to butcher the Latin Mass in the way they did? And so even if we see this as a bit of a conservative movement towards a more conservative liturgy, those inconsistencies are still going to be there. And I wish we could actually see some cardinals stand up and bring up these points. Why did we feel the need to change the Mass in such a way? If our main justification, it's just going to be in the vernacular, if that's not even something that's done to this day, what was the reason for butchering the Eucharistic prayer in the Roman canon? Changing into these four splintering Eucharistic prayers, that many of which are completely deficient to express the fullness of the holy sacrifice of the Mass. And so there's a lot there, but I think there's some food for thought there. What I think we should do during this time is really get back to how can we better understand the crisis in the church? Because as we see, all of this is involved, and all of it is it's really heightened during the conclave. We need to better understand the liturgy, better understand what the church is trying to teach us in this in the ancient Mass. We need to better understand how the church is constituted, right? When we say, there's these different Eastern Catholic churches, well, what is the unifying factor that brings all those things together? It's the faith, and it's also the center of unity with the Pope. I think we should meditate on these things. I think we should go back, read those old encyclicals, and I think many of the cardinals would benefit from doing the same as well. So keep praying for the conclave. We'll be back with some more conclave coverage really throughout the week. You can visit us here at Catholic Family News on our YouTube channel or Rumble channel. We also post various shorts on YouTube Shorts, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram as well, if you want to see us there. So we have a lot more coming. Be sure to like this video, leave a comment. If you want to go check out our newspaper, which covers many of these issues, you can visit catholicfamilynews.locals.com. You can also see that Father Fahey coverage as well. We also have a Q&A tomorrow. I'll be live here from Rome. Brian McCall also should be joining us, and we'll be talking about, with our editor-in-chief, Brian McCall, various questions that you can answer that you can ask over on our Locals channel. So go subscribe there. You can leave a question. We'll answer it. And we'll try to have more live Q&As on there as well. So from all of us here at CFN, may God grant you many joyful years.